Hey, it's Amethyst Virgo. So I have a new video topic. This is the birth chart and the people in your life. My goal is to make this a pretty to the point, but also educational video for some of you out there. And yes, I still have the aspect series. I have not forgotten. You know, the aspect series requires more time because I really write my notes out. I really do a lot of interpretation processing, looking up famous people, and not just looking up random people, but when I look up famous people, I actually do a little bit of interpretation, you know, in order to really make it alive for me. Not just taking random information and regurgitating it. So I put a lot of thought into what I do because I don't just like to spit things out and say, well, on Astro theme, it said this. I like to do my own thing. And so with that said, some of the video topics that I have coming up, I have to spend a little bit more time on. But for this one, I think this would be a cool video to jump into. So we're going to look at the chart and see some people that show up in your chart in terms of planets, in terms of houses that represent certain individuals, and different experiences that you may encounter. Now, I do want to invite you guys, some of you already subscribed, feel free to let me know via email how you like the new newsletter. So I decided to do a new newsletter because, well, it's brand new because I never did it before. I've always wanted to do a newsletter, and then you know, someone that I know who she's actually in my newsletter. I refer her site. She's a Reiki practitioner, and she's really good at what she does. And so she, you know, is also, you know, in the spiritual scene, and she has clients and things of that nature. And so she recently had her a really good newsletter come out. And I told her, I was like, yeah, you know, I've always wanted to do one. I've been thinking about it for like a year. I just haven't done it. So that encouraged me to get myself together and do this. And also, I don't do the general horoscopes anymore. I just don't have time. I had to prioritize charts, which are the funnest thing for me to do. So, but it's going to be filled. Astrology, not filled. It's actually going to be pretty straight to the point. But astrology tidbits, some things that maybe some of you know, some of you don't know about astrology, spiritual advice, book recommendations, recommendations for other spiritual practitioners, and also links to unlisted topic videos. There's some topics sometimes that I just record. I don't put out there mainstream that you'll have access to. And so you can subscribe using the link in the description box. All right, so we're going to now break this down. And so again, my goal here is to just give you what is needed in digestible chunks, just how it's supposed to be. As I said before, I try to just explain what needs to be said. Of course, I can go complex. I have Scorpio in my 3rd house, but my North Node is in Taurus in the 9th house. So I'm here to message things in a very practical, straightforward, to the point way that is digestible for people. Now, we always want to start with the house. And so is the house associated with any specific relationships? Is it the 3rd house? Is it the 7th house? Is it the 11th house? Is it the 4th house? Those things. Now, when we do that, we then ask ourselves, are there planets there? So if we know the 3rd house is siblings and we see Mars and Pluto, well, now we know we have to interpret that chart in a way in which, was there conflict, a serious sibling rivalry, as opposed to someone having Venus and Jupiter in the 3rd house, where that might be more favorable relationships, you know, between siblings. Obviously, the 3rd house is not just siblings. So one thing I do want to clarify is, yes, the 3rd house has like hundreds of things you could talk about. The 4th house, hundreds of things, you know, give or take. What I personally mean is that this video is not about all the things the 7th house means or all the things the 4th house means. It's about the people in the chart. So this is very specific to that, you know, in general. And of course, I have my other videos where I talk more broadly about the houses. Now, the main ruler, if a house is empty, you're going to look at the sign on the cusp. Sometimes I get people like, well, I have an empty house. What does that mean? Of course, a person can have siblings in an empty 3rd house. Of course, there's tons of people with relationships that have an empty 7th house. We look at it, just two situations happen when you have an empty house. It means there's not a lot of energy that you put forth in that house. Your attention is diverted somewhere. Or some people, it just means that area of that house is easier for others. It's easier for you. Like I have some empty houses where it's like, it's not an issue for me, where it's like sometimes the things that are actually in my houses are the things that need more of my attention. So it can work differently for different people. But the main rule, but we have to look at what's on the cusp. If Pisces is on the cusp of the 5th house or any house, we have to look at Neptune's placement in your chart. So we can still get some indications for what it means. The main ruler of a house is the house that rules it. So by rule, anytime you're interpreting 1st house, we're talking about assertion, self-identity. Anytime we're talking about the 5th house, we're talking about talent. We're talking about hobbies, interests, your confidence. It is inner confidence. The 11th house opposite is outer confidence, when you're around other people and engaging in their ideas. And so what that means is the meaning of a house doesn't change just because a planet decides to pop in, right? But in your chart, the chart ruler of that house is different. So that means, yes, we know that the sun rules the 5th house, but if Capricorn is on the sign of the cusp, is the sign on the cusp, and they don't have any planets in the 5th house, well then Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, becomes the de facto ruler of that house in that chart. And so we now have to make some connections and see what that means for that individual, right? Now, before I jump into this, Vedic may follow different patterns. There are different signifiers for people in Vedic astrology. I do have some people who follow me who have who are into both Western and Vedic astrology. Personally, I'm a Western modern astrologer. I have my own theory for how Vedic relates to my work personally, but I like to know a lot about everything. In fact, I'm doing some work with someone on their chart, and they actually are asking me to interpret their chart using their Vedic signs. I was like, all right, cool, let's look in there, right? But I'm sharing personally what has been the most accurate for the clients I attract. And what I mean by this, any of you who eventually want to be business owners or have your own content, or people that in some way you're giving services to, one thing I would do, and it doesn't have to be spiritual stuff, it could be anything. You know, there's people who make things. I know a lot of people who are very, very crafty. I'm not good with my hands, but I know a lot of people who are very creative in that way. You're going to attract the clients you attract. The astrologer that you guys watched before me probably doesn't have the same clientele I do. Just like that person that I just watched, has a completely different style than me, but I like the way they approach it and it works for them. And so what I mean is I do what makes sense for my clients. The people who say to me, yes, this was a great reading, this was life-changing, you really know your stuff, those are the people I attract. But who you attract or who someone else attracts are not going to be the same people. And so when you're doing content, you are going to attract a certain set of people. So let's move on. Let's see what's going on. So main planets as significators of people. So sun is masculine energy or father. Some people will say Saturn can also represent it, but Saturn is going to be the disciplinarian. If the disciplinarian was the mother, or the grandparent or whoever, that still can be interpreted in the chart. Okay. So I know some people get really caught up and, well, wait, my mom was really hard on me. What does this mean? Obviously, your chart is going to tell the story for you. But in general, the sun is going to be that masculine energy that you can see. That's why a lot of people who have sun in the 12th house, some people, not all, have either a strained relationship with the father, or the father wasn't there, or the father passed away, and something like that. Now, not everyone. Obviously, aspects to the sun will tell the story as well, and transits that you have had in your life. The moon is feminine energy, nurturing. It is emotional connections. Who nurtured you? If that was your grandpa, then in your chart, maybe we're going to see it was grandpa. But more than likely, the moon is going to signify the mother, even if there's a strained relationship with your mother. A lot of people that have moon in the 12th house relate to not always having that, what they felt, or moon in 8th sometimes. There's some type of disconnect from the 12th, or some type of harsh reality to face emotionally through 8th. Venus, feminine energy, but it also can be relative to friendship, partnership, coming together. Mercury can indicate siblings. Jupiter can indicate children. Sometimes aspects with Jupiter can it's like if someone has like aspects favorable to Jupiter, Venus in their chart, sometimes you can see relationships come up with that. Saturn are the disciplinarians. Who disciplined you? Who gave you your structure? Juno, marriage asteroid, partner. I have a video on most of these planets in general, but definitely I have one about Juno. Now, honorable mentions. These are the defaults. I say honorable mentions for a reason. Now, sometimes these planets here can also indicate something. Mars can be who you have conflict with, depending on the house. So again, if it's a house that deals with people, Mars in 7th house, Mars in 3rd house, Mars in 11th house, even Mars in 10th house can be a problem with authority. Pluto can sometimes, and again, the reason I say honorable mentions is because these are not the default planets that deal with the signifiers of a person. That is these planets here. See what I'm saying? But sometimes we can see that, again, you need a thorough interpretation to know that. Pluto, who exerts control over you, who you control sometimes. If someone has a chart showing they are very dominating, then you can see it there. Uranus, the generation you're a part of, so it can be your connection to people that are your peers. And Neptune, spiritual people who help you in your journey, can sometimes be indicated through the chart. Now, one thing we're going to look at here when we first look at this. So, all about you. The interesting thing when we actually go through the charts, especially even when I looked at Western astrology and also Vedic astrology, it seems that in both systems, first and second houses are different in that they are the only ones that don't represent other people. Like, yes, you can see if Venus is in the first house or Venus is in the second house. You could definitely make some connections. So I don't want to say that other people are never part of that fabric, but typically the first and second houses are you, right? The first house is self, it's identity. The second house is self-sufficiency and money. So those are the only houses that don't have as much of that direct connection to other people as you see in some of the other placements. Now, obviously the third house is communication, but a lot of times what I start with when I'm doing charts is the early life, your early socialization. Who were you around? Were they dominating? Were they inviting? Were they inspirational? What is the case? Siblings can be found here. So when people have placements in the third house, you tend to see siblings. A lot of times what I'll see, let me just see this real quick, because there was somebody that I personally know. There's two people I know like really well. And I want to see what it was that I noticed that was in their chart and my chart. 1 second. Because what I noticed with these people, I'm just pulling it up really quickly. Yes. So the three of us, we all have Pluto in the third house, and we're all we're the oldest of some of the family. Now, me, it's a little bit different because I'm the old. Like, I always look at it like, I don't want to go into detail, but like I have half siblings, but then one of my half siblings actually is more like, I mean, I grew up with her. So I don't call her like half sister because we grew up, like she's older than me, but because she's my mom's daughter, she was always around, and my brother and I were on the same age. So I always looked at like I'm older because I'm older than my brother, about 1.5 years. So for me, it's interesting where I'm technically not the oldest at all. Like I have siblings way older than me. My oldest sibling that was older than me was about 20 years older than me. On my dad's side, is about 20 years older than me. And the other one, who was 19 years older than me, he passed away. And then I have another half sister. So I actually have a multitude of things going on there. But Pluto, I do kind of consider myself the oldest because me and my brother, we grew up like the same age, around the same age. But I always had that kind of more, I was a little bit more bossy than him. I just was. That is true. So I resonate with that Pluto energy in the third house. And I resonate with the third house energy of siblings in general. I think it really describes my experience being a younger sibling and also my experience being an older sibling. So many people can relate to it, the third house, but I know there's other systems where they say, well, the 11th house is your oldest sibling. And we'll talk about that once we get there. Now, the planets can indicate sibling or the nature of the relationship. You definitely can see the nature of the relationships when it comes to that energy there. The siblings that you have are your first introduction to relating to someone often around your age. Like I said, I have siblings that are way older than me, but I also had, like my sister is 13 years older than me. Both of my half sisters are like 13 years older than me. I think one's like 14, 13. And then again, my half brothers were like 19 to 20 years older than me. And then my brother is 1.5 years younger than me. So, it's a multitude of things. They're your first introduction of relating to someone around your age, or someone maybe that's older, younger, whatever the case is, because some people maybe are more of the, have to be the one who's protective over their sibling or something of that nature. We can see transits that impact third house from family, siblings. Sometimes you can see something pass through your third house and it's actually not for you, it's your sibling. It's news for your sibling. Third house is news, right? Information, communication. Now the fourth house relates to mother, the moon, how you were raised, who raised you, where you come from. It's the feminine, it's the nurturing archetype, the moon. So it ruling the fourth house only makes sense. Now, traditionally, astrologers, especially Western, refer to the fourth as father and the 10th as mother. Now, that's not the case necessarily in Vedic. Vedic has had the long-held belief of the fourth being the mother. And Vedic actually says the 9th is the father. We're going to get there in a second because then some people say the father's 10th. We're going to get there. there's been a lot of shifts to that because in theory, if you look at it, it's like it kind of does not really make sense in the archetype type of thing. If traditionally mothers were doing the nurturing, the raising, the cooking, the cleaning, all of that. Remember, I'm talking about back in the day, right? That idea. And fathers were going to, again, things have changed. Chill out, because some people just get too much in this. If because some people have different dynamics in their household, and that's perfectly fine. I don't judge. But we're looking at this traditionally because that's what we're talking about. Saturn being going to work, having goals, kind of being distant away or limited in that emotional connection. So it would make more sense to say the 10th is the father, or the upper house, or the upper is the father, especially in terms of like preparing the child for the world. Was traditionally the father's role. Again, we're talking traditional right now. Mother is the 4th house. That's home, that's comfort. Now, Vedic always said that 4th was the mother. It appears in my research. But at a minimum, it's the influence of who raised you. Regardless of gender, regardless of the situation, we have to use symbols to represent something, or else astrology is meaningless. You know what I mean? So we have to say, this means this and this means that, and let's interpret the chart to see any differences. But a lot of modern Western astrologers now view it as 4th is the mother. So that's why you see that a lot on social media. There are some traditional astrologers today that still will say the 4th is the father. I think it's because of the inheritance thing. They're like the inheritance and the property, and that's father. But if the moon is the ruler, we're thinking of that feminine energy, right? And most people in these days vie for 4th being the mother. Again, I look at the planet for that. My placements, example, because I'm like, I got to hit you with that. My mom is a huge influence in my life, prepared me a lot for life, a huge motivator for everything I've done. Moon is in my 4th house. My father passed away. The sun represents father. Now, this is not everybody's situation. Sun's in the 12th house, and I already talked about that. So for me, it makes perfect sense, because if the 4th house is supposed to be father, my father passed away when I was 7. I have no, I remember him vividly up to that age, but he wasn't around enough to raise me and mold me, right? So the 4th house is my mother's influence on me and her family's influence on me. 4th house, past, where you come from. So that's how I would look at that. 5th house. All right. Children, likelihood of having children, or your attitude towards having children. Sometimes with the 5th house, you can tell. Sometimes if I see someone's 5th house, if there's any like a moon or Venus or, Jupiter, it's sun even, typically you can be like, yeah, there's probably going to be some children, or you're probably going to want children. So it's a very sensitive topic to talk about, because some people do not want them, cannot have them, have difficulties. But in general, sometimes you can see, some people even say the planets are said to indicate the gender of the child, right? So you can say like the moon or Venus might be a girl, or Mercury might be twins. Some people use that predictive, those predicted indicators as well. The reason I say attitude towards children, because I've seen enough charts to see sometimes people who are like, I don't want them, right? And that's, that's perfectly fine. And so what I do then is you can see it. It's usually, I can see it in the chart. It's usually a placement or a sign on the cusp, or planet in the house, which means this person needs freedom. This person doesn't want to be tied down, or this person wants to wait. A lot of times if you see Capricorn or Taurus, especially, these people wait. They're going to wait to have kids. Any of the earth signs on the cusp of the 5th house, usually these people wait. They're not the ones having kids right out of high school, typically. Now, Mars and Aries in the 5th house, for example, this could be a person that may be somewhat individualistic in their attitude. And they value their freedom. They value activities. They value fun. And they're like, I don't know about kids. Now, you could say, look, but wait a minute. My moon is in Cancer. In my it wouldn't be in your 4th house, because Cancer does not come. Cancer comes after Aries, but you know what I mean. I'm trying to get at here. Someone's moon is in Cancer in a house that has something to do with emotions, or has something to do with, a person desiring that family aspect. Of course, this is going to change, but this still might be a person who's maybe still wants their freedom. This might be a person like, I need to go out every weekend. I can't be tied down with these kids. That's some people are like that. Whereas Venus in Cancer would be considered favorable, like in having kids. A lot of times if they say the water cusp, don't be alarmed. I have Capricorn on the cusp, my 5th house, and I have 2. So you shouldn't be like, oh my goodness, if it really depends on the rest of the chart as well. Now the 5th house, now it's all these other aspects of the 5th house. The 5th house is whatever you enjoy. All right, and we just talked about people who are parents and that children. Now, obviously, there are some people who are just not good parents, but for the most part, children bring people joy, right? That's why a lot of people want to have children. But at the same time, the fifth house is anything that's enjoyment. Okay, so it might seem like a leap to be like, oh, romantic partners. Yes, but think about what creates kids, okay? Romantic partners. And the thing about it is, obviously, in today's world, we have all type of fertility technology for, if there's any problems with conception and things of that nature. But in general, think about that, right? And so with that said, the fifth house can also, for some people, show their flings, who they desire, their affairs, their sexual attitudes. If someone has Jupiter in Aries, Aries is just gonna be bursting with passion, and Jupiter is expansive. It wants to spread everywhere, and usually it's knowledge. But if in other ways, we're talking about a really bodily and a really very fiery sign of Aries going for what it wants. You could have someone who's enthused by a lot of partners and likes having different partners, whereas Saturn in Taurus is not as much. Saturn in Taurus is going to be like, no, I need somebody I value. No, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not interested until I find what I really want. So that's just something to keep in mind there. With the fifth house can also represent your attitudes towards the people you want to. Now again, the fifth house is not a serious house, so it's not that a person who has a bunch of flings is necessarily going to always be a committed partner. It really will depend on other aspects of the chart. Now the sixth house is daily life, and so in today's modern world, it's about coworkers too. Obviously, the sixth house is responsibility, but remember, this video is about people in the chart. It's people you see daily, people you help or support. We know the sixth house is related to that kind of hospitality, that kind of service-oriented type of work. Now, Venus could also be here, and let me give you an example. So if someone's like, well, the sixth house is coworkers. Well, a person with Venus in the sixth house needs good work relationships. They need positive work relationships. It also, I've seen people with Venus in sixth house that meet their partner through work, or in some way they're dating folks that they are working with. So Venus, it can be interesting when it's in the sixth house. Again, there's other ways to interpret Venus in the sixth house, but we're talking about the people right now. An example of that would be like, and you also could see some conflict. Like if someone has Pluto or Mars in the sixth house, it would be like the person who shows up to work every day, but they don't like, they have conflict with who they work with, and it's like a struggle to get along with them, right? So sometimes you can see, the daily experience that people have through certain placements. It gets interesting in that regard. The seventh house is the descendant partner. So I have a whole video on descendants. It can be the person you learn from because they are a mirror, not a mirror image. They are the opposite of you, right? They reflect the differences in what you are, and you can learn from that person because they're showing you a different approach. Now, also the seventh house is related. Inside of the seventh house, we have marriage and business partnerships. Who you relate to is the seventh house. So when you look at the seventh house, there's different ways to look at it. Definitely the descendant. But then if there's anything in it, it's going to show your relationship, your attitude towards relationships, or even the type of people that you attract. You have Pluto and Mars there. Well, maybe you're going to attract power struggle relationships, right? There's different ways to indicate what it's going to mean. Now, what about the open enemies theory? The seventh house is said to be open enemies. The 12th is secret enemies. I think personally, the way I look at it is this. Well, I look at it as whoever you're with the most has the potential to annoy you the most. Let's be honest here. And so I think the open enemies theory in the context in which I see it is more so whoever you relate to, it takes a lot of energy to keep that up. So whether it's a business partnership, it's a marriage, it's a relationship, it's whatever, it takes a lot to keep that up, to keep that relationship flowing. And so that can sometimes bring about conflict because you're trying to maneuver things in a certain way. And then remember, so let's say someone has Pisces on the cusp of the seventh house, and then they have Mercury and Mars or something, I don't know. The sun, let's say Sun and Mercury is in, or not Sun and Mercury. Mercury and Venus is in the Pisces in the seventh house. Let's say we have that, right? And so obviously your ascendant is Virgo, and if you have that Pisces descendant sign, so the way which you encounter the world as a Virgo, it doesn't always match up to the way your relationships are. So that can definitely add to conflict. And with open enemies, I think it's more so the conflict that can emerge in the 7th house, where it's really supposed to be about, it's Venus ruled. So it's not about conflict, but what can happen is over time, you have to balance out those relationships, because after all, Venus is also about balance. You have to learn to do that. That's my idea on that. Now, an example I would have is someone had Venus and Jupiter. Jupiter can definitely mean multiple. It can mean something that is multiplying. Venus, obviously, we know partnership and harmony and balance. Again, we know there's the financial part and the values of Venus, but right now we're talking about people. And so if that's an indicator, there could definitely be a person who values the closeness of a relationship. Venus, if we talk about Jupiter, is also kids. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, so that can mean very favorable for having kids. As well, just by having Jupiter in Cancer, then we see Venus is there as well. So if that's going there, it values the closeness of a relationship. Could have many marriages, perhaps, or this is a person who likes to constantly feel that they're in some type of relationship or partnership that gives them a sense of security. Again, give or take, and it really depends on I'm not saying this is, there could be other aspects of this person's chart that makes this difficult. Maybe there's a square in opposition to this, but that's just one thing that I would share. Now, the 8th house is who we join resources with. It's intimate partners. This is where it differs from the openness of the 7th house, which is, hey, let's get together. The 8th house is more of a serious step. And so, from the 7th to the 8th house, both can deal with bringing together people, but it also does something a bit different, because remember, Mars and Pluto is here. So Pluto is definitely that consumption and Mars is that action. And so it's no longer just the Venus, oh, let's come together and let's organize this together. And let's, it's 8th house of let's, financially join. Let's gain from one another. It's who gives to us, or who we can financially join with. People who have Jupiter in the 8th house, always tell them, you're probably going to be good at getting investments if you want to get in business. Now, again, look at the rest of your chart. Intimate partners. Intimacy is the 8th house. The 5th house is fun. The 7th house is partnership. If people have really strong 8th house, they get really deep into their emotions in terms of relationships, because 8th house energy is about, okay, if I'm going to go in, I'm going to go all the way in terms of how I feel. When you have 8th house energy, it also can be who you inherit from. Now, the 4th house is inheritance of physical property, okay, or legacy. Because the 4th house is our past, where we come from, our lineage. The 8th house is more so more of the now, the coming together and trying to merge something. And so this is the people that can be represented through the 8th. Now, the 9th house, which is interesting, is Vedic contributes the 9th house to the house of the fatherly influence. You will see in astrology there is still this debate. Now, only thing I say about debates, know them and pick a struggle, right? You have to pick one. Now, you probably could say, like, wow, this person's chart, the 9th house represents father. The 10th house, this person's chart represents father. But it really depends on your practice and what you personally resonate with in general. The 9th house can be people you meet and travel. If a person has, let's say a person has Venus in the 9th house, they're probably going to meet someone, a friend, a close friend or relationship in the 9th, if they have that Venus in the 9th house. Because that companionship, that partnership, that joining together, the 9th house is distant travel. Foreign energy is the 9th house. So it's people who might be different from you, where you're from. Now, it's because it's opposite that 3rd house, which is where you come, it's a part of where you come from. That's the 4th house, but the 3rd house is neighborhood, and you tend to live in neighborhoods with people who are similar to you in some degree. Now, example of this would be a Venus in Sagittarius or Venus in Aquarius person in the 9th house, or in general, but definitely once it's in the 9th house, we have someone more likely to marry outside their race, ethnicity, religion, etc. Now, that's not unheard of in today's society, but that's just something that's more pronounced when you have certain placements. These are the people that you might be drawn to. You're attracted to people different than you in some way, shape, or form. And you gain from that. Because remember, you gain insight and experience. The 9th house dealing with that kind of experience that you go out and get. All right, so the 10th house. So, I just said that there's like a little debate around which house actually shows, the father. Personally, what the research that I've done and just the comparisons is typically the 10th house is the father. Now, I can see why someone could say the ninth house. Now, if you think about it just in literal terms, if the moon is more feminine energy or that house, but then the ninth house is Jupiter, which is more of that wisdom, that expansiveness, but the moon is more of that nurturing emotional intelligence, but the Jupiter is the I can see how moon and Jupiter can be seen, I guess, as, you know, parts of the parenting experience. So the ninth house could be father, but the 10th house is, to me, Saturn ruling the 10th house means it's the father figure. It's the authority figure. Now, the authority figure does not have to be the father. I want to be very clear. I've done charts where someone, yes, there is a difference in the way in which they were raised, and it's not this strict, oh, well, it was the father and it was the mother and they had to do this and everything. I just want us to be clear with that yes, families can look all different types of ways, but we have to have symbols for something, and this is part of it. But the 10th house is an angular house like the 4th house. So the way I look at it is, I personally like and see the 4th is where you're coming from and the 10th house is where you're going. Right? And yes, you can definitely interpret if the moon's in the 10th house and the mother was doing that. The mother nurtured you to get out in the world and figure your goals out. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think either way, it doesn't matter. You can still see if one parent is the nurturer and one parent is more of the disciplinarian, or neither parent is, right? Because you could definitely see chart placements where neither person is all that emotional or all that preparing the child for the real world. It really depends on the situation. But the 10th house is just authority figures, whoever. It's also can be people you idealize and people who you respect, right? It's people that you respect, that you look up to, can also be seen through the 10th house. Also, like, again, it depends on the placements. If someone had Mars and Pluto in the 10th house, that could be power struggles with authority figures. Now, the 11th house is friendship, networks, people you benefit from. The type of people you should be around for social capital is the 11th house. Very important to look there. And I think that at first, that's not what people first look at. They're not looking at the 11th house at first, but it's like whatever planet is there is going to show the type of people you draw to you, right? Your networks. People who are looking for something in particular sometimes. Like if you're someone trying to influence people, the 11th house can show your influence. Right? What type of friendships do you attract? Do you attract harmonious ones through Venus? Do you attract ones that are more serious through Saturn that stand the test of time? Do you attract, what is it? There's one placement, I forgot what it was, that I was doing some charts and this placement kept coming up with like 2 different people. I'm like, oh, blur the lines. Blurring the lines. Especially the aspects of certain planets, I'm like, oh, like, friends with benefits type of thing, right? So the 11th house can be really helpful to see your energy in group dynamics and the type of people that you tend to go towards, what type of groups you're associated with. Some systems do say that the 11th house energy can be seen through the 11th house. Now, in my chart, the 3rd house explains my sibling experience more than 11th, because in 11th, I have Venus in Cancer, which you would say, like, okay, that's, the feminine energy, but it's like, well, technically, my oldest sibling is male, technically. And even, the siblings that I grew up with more immediately, the 3rd house makes perfect sense for my relationship with my siblings that I did grow up around more. So personally, that's how I would say that. But again, you might have a different experience and that's totally fine. Who is hidden. Right? When we look at the 12th house, it's obviously not a very tangible house, meaning in terms of it is not connected with things that are out in the open. It's things that are isolated, right? And so, yes, you could definitely go into isolation, right? So if we're looking at the 12th house, yes, we talk about the spiritual lens, but yes, it literally means isolation. You could have a person who's like always away or put away. In ancient texts, the 12th house was considered when people were considered crazy. So think about it. The 12th house, a lot of things that people are able to do would have been considered crazy back in the day in terms of their spiritual abilities, and things of that nature. So what is interesting is that, like, that's why you would see something like hospitalization, mental hospitals, jails, or things like that, 12th house going away. In the modern context, because people, there is more freedom of expression, right? In modern context, for many people, the 12th house is not just this isolated place. It is more about their sensitivity to spiritual dealings. With that said, that's why secret enemies can sometimes be there, is because you cannot see them. It is also there because you look at the 12th house as a place where you're not really conscious of what is in the 12th house. It just is there, and it's up to the person to do with what is what is there, right? If you have placements in the 12th house, I always say, like, again, we activate them. Things can happen just to you instead of you controlling them if you're not careful. But because we're not conscious of that, what sometimes can happen is, like, it creates this kind of conflict with individuals. A lot of times you can look at the sign that rules your 12th house to see who your secret enemies might be. And in many cases, you can look at it by sign. You could even look at it by element. You know, if you have fire there, or earth, or air, or it could be that. But so what you have to understand is, because that's a part of you that's hidden, you're not going to like that in other people. Okay? And that is why there can sometimes be conflict there, or because those people don't see you showing that part of yourself. They don't like you, or there can be issues. I have plenty of 12th house videos about certain things like that. But for example, if somebody has, let's give an example. A lot of Virgo risings, the Leo, we got Leo in the 12th house. Now, it depends on the person. It does definitely depends on the person. But I know a few folks besides myself as Virgo risings. We don't like, when you have Leo in the 12th house, you're not an attention seeker. Unless you have a placement there. It is subject to the chart. If you have a placement there that shows that you're kind of vying for attention, that might be possible. But if you have Leo hitting your 12th house, you're not comfortable with being in the spotlight, or you have to work to get into the spotlight, because it's not something that you really are conscious of wanting to portray to the world. And so people who do that, it can rub you the wrong way. These can be people who bring out the worst in you. And so with the 12th house, it's very, it's different. It's not like the neighbor or whatever the case may be. But when you look at the 12th house, it is important, because you're going to need to understand that it's going to give a different layer to everything. It's not something that's direct. It's something that could even happen over time. Now, I do think there's a positive to that. Now, not everyone. It doesn't mean you're going to be fighting battles because you have any placements in the 12th house. It simply means to be aware of that energy in your 12th house, because that's it's not showing itself. So now you have a disconnect from that energy and people of that energy, right? There's a slight disconnect. So when you see those people and their traits, you don't recognize it in yourself, or you don't want to recognize it in yourself. So now that becomes an issue. And those people could in turn not really vibe with you or understand you and try to control you in some way, because they know what they are, right? Like if they're a person who's very, let's say you have a person who's like very boisterous, very like out there and whatever, and you're not that, or they think, oh, you're staying to yourself, you think you're better than me. Those type of situations that a lot of you 12th house people have said have happened. Like people assume that you don't want to deal with them, or you think you're better than them, or but it's really like you just want to be left alone. And also, one thing I do want to touch on with the 12th house, one thing with spirituality is, honestly, the 12th house for every single person is not a place of loss and confusion. Okay. Now, the 12th house in some ways can represent karmic people as well. It can represent people who are here to, you have to face something that maybe in a previous life was difficult. So it can be karmic people, relationships as well, coming through the 12th house. But it's not always this place of loss and confusion for every individual. You get what I'm saying? If you have a person who has mastered parts of their chart, they're not sitting here crying, talking about, oh, I'm so confused, Neptune was 12th house, I don't know what to do. Like, think about it. If you know someone with 12th house placements and they're pretty legit, clearly they did not let it control them. It's not always a place of not knowing, oh my gosh, I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like, for some people that I've talked to, right? And a lot of people some people who've actually even gotten famous, or they're known for their spiritual work in terms of dealing with angels, spirits, people who are mediums. They deal with entities beyond the physical world. So we can't just say the 12th house, and that's what I'm saying. If it was not accepted in a certain period of time, of course we're going to think those people are crazy and put them in a mental institution. That was the history of the 12th house. But in the modern context, we see it somewhat in a different way. Some people do deal with angels and spirit guides, and even like ancestry work as your more 4th house, right? dealing with different deities and things like that. Sometimes it can be 12, sometimes, well, 8th is great for like rituals and things of that nature for people who are really into like more transformative magic, things of that nature. Anyway, the video is not all about that. But the point is, there are people who have different experiences. And I'm going to be honest with you. You don't have to experience something to know that it was real for someone else. We all have different spiritual gifts. Believe it or not, yes, a lot of people have intuitive and psychic abilities. And yes, people can develop it. Everyone does not, especially when you look at the 12th house as a gift. Typically, you see people's gifts, spiritual awareness in the 12th house. We're not the same. You're not the same. You cannot tell somebody your path is this. That means you're this. That means that. You can't do that. Some people have their ancestors guiding them. Some people see spirits. Some people go to different dimensions. I know some of you are like, whoa. All right. Some people have these different experiences outside of our physical world, and because they do, it is not up to me, it is not up to you, it is not up to anyone to tell them, no, the 12th house only means that this. Some people are working with this 12th. I'm telling you, some people are lost. I'm gonna be honest. Some people, it's you know, they're lost. It is confusing. It is not it's not an easy house. But there's potential there. And so I did want to highlight the fact that there can be different types of energies in the 12th house. It's different than the 3rd. You're not going to see it's not neighbors, things of that nature, or siblings and things like that. But the 12th house can be entities or people that can be sensitive to that. For a lot of people, it just might be secret enemies, or it just might be like, it could be people who bring out the worst in you. Now, you do have to look at the whole chart, because sometimes you can see connections as well. But remember, the 12th house is hidden. So a lot of times when you see people's placements in there, you have to bring out, like, oh, you have Aquarius there. Okay, so you're not really sure what group you belong to. Okay, you need to go find your group. You need to go find your people that make you feel comfortable with being who you are. You need to find some type of spiritual group or spiritual community. You know what I mean? So it's not always a bad thing. I really want to be clear on that. I don't do that's good, that's bad. I do, hey, this might be a little bit more challenging, but this is how to work with it. And one thing that's really fascinating to me, for all of you who are also parents out there, you and your children. So, I am going to just, do a video. I talk a little bit more about children's charts. When I talk about children's charts, I always start with the parent. The parent is going to be the anchor. So I only do children's charts if the actual parent, guardian, and I know a lot of other astrologers do this as well. Like, anyone under the age of 18, you need, your parents' permission to do it. And, to help parents see, how to potentially raise their children using the placement. So, I'm not a child parenting guru. I'm not, but I can interpret the placements pretty well, obviously, and make some connections. I'm not super nanny, right? But it is fascinating to look at any two people's charts and see what energies are there. And especially when we're thinking of supporting our children, even in my kids' charts, I already see what area of their life that it's kind of, they know how to do it already. It's like, interesting. But other things where I'm just like, oh, you're going to need help. This doesn't come naturally to you, right? Or let me look at this house. Again, your child is a child. And I'll talk about this in a video, meaning like we don't need to imprint on someone like, oh, you're an Aries sun and that means this. You don't do that with children. But you as a parent know to watch how they're reacting, responding to things, and knowing what type of energy you need to give them, but also you as a parent are learning from them as well. And that's a whole different topic. And I will address that. So thank you for watching. Please make sure you have subscribed to the channel, like the video, and also make sure that you've subscribed to the newsletter below.